Hello, I'm Neil Nunes with the BBC News. The European Union has agreed to open formal membership talks with Ukraine at a summit in Brussels. Charles Michel, the president of the European Council, called it a clear signal of hope. President Zelensky called it a victory for Ukraine and for the whole of Europe.
Today's decision on opening accession negotiations is also vital for all those people in EU countries who believe that Europe can avoid falling back into old times of endless, fruitless disagreements between capitals.
The Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orbán, who had opposed membership talks for Ukraine, agreed not to be in the room when the decision was adopted. The EU also agreed to begin membership talks with Moldova and grant candidate status to Georgia. The United States has called on Israel to scale down its war on Hamas in the near future, with President Biden urging more to be done to protect civilians in Gaza. The U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan, on a visit to Tel Aviv, had earlier pushed the government on a timescale for the conflict. From Jerusalem, Hugo Bashega.
Jake Sullivan's visit took place amid growing discontent from the Biden administration over the war. His advice was for the Israeli military to shift to a more precise and targeted phase, although there were no details of a timeline. The Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant said the goal was to destroy Hamas, but that it would take several more months. Israel is facing international calls for a ceasefire amid mounting civilian casualties in Gaza and a worsening humanitarian crisis.
Mexico's President Andrés Manuel López Obrador has appointed a former aide, Lenia Batres, as a new Supreme Court judge after lawmakers refused to approve his earlier candidates for the job. In two instances, the Senate rejected all candidates from a shortlist presented by the head of state, thus enabling Mr. López Obrador to become the first Mexican president in modern times to directly select a new judge for the country's top court. Luis Farjado from BBC Monitoring has more details in this report.
President López Obrador has often suggested that elements of the judiciary have tried to block his government's reformist agenda. Now he has chosen to fill a vacancy in the Supreme Court with Lenia Batres, a former lawmaker with close ties to his administration. Batres says she shares the president's desire for judiciary reform. Critics say that the appointment of a judge so clearly identified with the president's political goals does not bode well for the adequate functioning of checks and balances in the Mexican government.
That report from Luis Farjado. This is the World News from the BBC. The presidents of Venezuela and Guyana have signed a joint declaration making a commitment not to use force and to resolve their border dispute through international law. The agreement was reached after a 2-hour meeting between President Nicolás Maduro and Irfan Ali in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. The Maldives says it's terminating a bilateral agreement with India that permitted New Delhi to collaborate in mapping the seabed in Maldivian territorial waters. It's the latest sign that President Mohamed Muiz, widely seen as pro-China, wants to steer away from India's influence. The president of a top-flight Turkish football club who attacked a referee earlier this week has been permanently banned from the Turkish Football Federation. Faruk Koca punched referee Halil Umut Meler after his team MKE Ankaragücü conceded a late equalizer in a match on Monday night. A newly discovered drawing by the British sculptor and artist Henry Moore has sold at auction for $32,000. It was purchased for a few dollars 20 years ago. Meta Sikrika has this story.
The woman who bought the drawing thought it was just a print. For 20 years she had it on her wall, not thinking it was anything particularly special. When she decided to have the drawing valued, its frame was removed and it was discovered that it was actually an original watercolor signed by Henry Moore. It also had another drawing by him on the back. The front features 4 studies of a mother and child. The reverse side is a larger depiction of the theme, one of Moore's most iconic motifs inspired by the tragic death of his mother and the birth of his only daughter.
That's the latest BBC World News.